Good morning, everyone. This is Mr. Jones in my home studio. I'm going to be showing you really as quickly as I can a couple of different methods of Alla Prima painting to get us ready for our next project. If you're still working on your Brunei project, this is about the time that we should be transitioning to our Alla Prima. But don't fret or worry if you're not quite finished with the Brunei yet. So finish that out as well as you can, and we'll be starting this, sort of in a staggered way. And we should have plenty of time to finish before the end of the year, so don't fret, don't worry. Right now, we're going to just look over the things that you need before you start, which you should know. You should have your palette pad with you, or something similar to that. If you have the palette pad and you're using that, I really recommend that you leave the paper in the pad as you're working so that you can hold it like this. If you tear it out, then it's all floppy and you're kind of limited in what you can do with it. So this is nice because I can hold it and move it around. The second thing is I want you to always make sure before you start to paint that you put out all of the colors that you have in your kit. Now, I don't have the black out here because I don't use black, but the kit, with the 6 colors that we have, every time you sit down to paint, put down all 6 colors, because very seldom in real life will you see a color that will match something that's straight from the paint tube, right? If you're painting something that's blue, it's not going to be the same color blue you see in the paint tube. So here's my palette ready. I have some brushes, so you probably don't have this many, but feel free to use as many as you like. If you want to add brushes to your collection that we got you started with in the kit, please feel free to do that. I also have my handy old t-shirt, which I really also always recommend. Painting cloth, very, very handy for wiping off your brush, for maybe wiping off, blending a little bit on your painting, things like that, although be careful with it. So I have my canvas over here, and we'll be starting on this really quickly. I'm going to show you, like I said, 2 different methods. There are 100 different ways to paint. These are just a couple of different ways of looking at it. You'll probably, if you keep painting, over the years, you'll develop sort of your own way of doing it. But these are a couple of good ways to think about organizing your painting, how to start, how to proceed. So we'll get started with that. I'll do a lot of it in time lapse, but I'll also stop to make some comments now and then. So let's get started. So there's my canvas. I have it set up where I have some nice natural light. You don't need to have natural light necessarily, but you want good light. You don't want to strain your eyes or anything. So first I'm going to do a really quick drawing with my brush, very, very fast. This is going to be a simple painting. And then I will start what they call the blocking in process. This is all you really need to get started. You don't have to have every single detail sketched in, not necessary at all. But you do want to have the proportions correct. You can do your tracing the way we have done before in class. You can take your time and sort of develop a drawing freehand if you like to do that. So I'm going to start now doing what they call blocking in, and this is one method of doing that where I'm just going to look at the pear and the apple and paint them just a solid color of whatever I think is the sort of best average color of what I'm looking at. So we're going to start blocking in, and then we'll go from there. I'm going to start with the background because that makes a lot of sense. You work your way forward in space so that the objects that you paint closer towards you are overlapping the background slightly, and then you don't have to worry about going back and painting the background around them. So you can see that all I've really done so far is to just block in, color in these areas almost like a coloring book, just coloring in the local color Local color is just the average sort of color of whatever you think that object is. So what color is that pear? Well, it's a pear green color, is the apple red. Now there are variations that are going to happen within all those, right? Within all of these things. But we start out with just the most general color that we can. Make a best guess, right? And you also noticed at this point, it doesn't have to be perfect. You're not thinking about details at all at this point. We're really thinking first about composition and about color, and then the detail comes in much later. Now next I'm going to start looking at areas of shadow based on where I think the light is coming from. So I'll start laying in darker shadows within these tones, right, to start to bring some shape to these objects. One thing you might not have noticed is that for each of these objects I'm using a different brush. So I'm keeping one brush just for green colors, another one for red, another one for the blue, and that just helps keep the paint, you know, sort of clean and pure and not get too muddy and that sort of thing. So something to think about. Otherwise, you want to keep your brushes, you know, kind of clean, wipe them off often. And so now I'm going to start laying in those shadows. So if you noticed, what I'm using there for that shadow color was the red of the apple plus some blue, some of the ultramarine blue, because this is a blue tabletop. That blue is reflecting up into the red, and so that's going to change the color. Here by the leaf, I mixed in a little bit of green because there's green filtering through that leaf. So you want to think about how these colors sort of blend and mix that way from the light bouncing around. There's more to do in that, but I also wanted to show you that as I go to blend out this shadow here, I'm wiping my brush off really well, using the same brush with this red colors in it, but wiping it off so that it's very clean. And then I'm going to use just the ends of the bristles, just the toe of the brush, to blend out this shadow so that I get a nice soft edge, and that's what's going to make this apple look round, is how slowly that tapers off into the shadow. So I have the basic shadow blocked in on the pear now, and I'll be developing those more, so there are darker spots inside those. I'm going to start working on the shadow of the blue on here underneath. And for now, we're going to keep working on developing the shadows because that's really what's going to give structure to this, right? Things are starting to look three-dimensional already. So it's very helpful to work first on the shadows in this method and then finish with the highlights. So that will be the last thing that we do. But you can see things are already starting to shape up. So I've done quite a lot within the shadows, more color variation that's happening there. And if you notice too, I've blended in some blue here in the shadows of the apple and the pear because there's blue light reflecting from the blue tabletop. Also, in the shadows, in these cast shadows, there are some blues and greens mixed in with those because the shadows are also picking up reflected light from the pear and the apple. So they take on a little bit of that color. You also have areas like, for instance, here in the apple and even here with the pear of what they call a lost edge. And this often happens when you have an object that is rounded and is tapering off into shadow where you just don't see the edge very clearly. It sort of fades out and disappears, and that's fine. We don't have to paint every single edge just exactly, you know, paper sharp. Sometimes we don't see them that clearly. You know, they sort of fade off here too. So the next stage is I'm going to come back with just some highlights that are really going to pop this out. But so far what we have are the medium tones, those local colors, the local green, this local red, the local blue of the tabletop. We have the darks laid in, so now we have a range of color from the darkest darks to the middle tones, and then we're going to come back really quickly with some highlights. Highlights generally do happen fairly fast. We're going to use the same brushes. I'm just going to keep wiping them out. Use the red tone brush for the red, the green tone for the greens, and so on. Having laid in these highlight colors, and if you notice, I haven't used anything like pure white yet. I was using a very, very light yellow green here, and a light sort of red with a little bit of green mixed in because I wanted some warmth to this apple. And then I used a little blue around the lightest highlight. And now I'm just going to come back with a tiny bit of white, pure white, for the brightest part of the highlights to make those really stand out, really pop. And I don't want to over blend them because I want that white to sit up on top of the other colors and get all the attention. And of course, you can come back with some very small highlights too in areas that might need just a little bit of emphasis that are catching the light, that maybe just the top of a stem or something like that. But very lightly. And keep in mind, these sort of highlights and details are things you really need to save till the end with this method. Now, you can paint in other ways. There are people who paint in a sort of a detailed way from the very beginning. I think this is the best way to learn, so that you're really painting the whole painting all at one time. You know, you lay in all the basic colors, you lay in then all of the shadows, and then you come back and do all of the highlights, so that you're developing the whole painting as a whole, right? So that it's unified and harmonious. If you paint a terrific apple and a terrific pear, but then they don't really go together, the colors are not really working together, then you have a problem with the whole painting, right? So this helps you to see how the whole painting is progressing and helps you to think in sort of broad terms of the whole painting. So this is one method, laying in those, blocking in those local colors. I'll show you a different method, and that'll be the subject of the next video.